Feel free to unmute and ask any questions you like to either of our speakers. I have plenty, but I'll hold mine until the others have had their say.
I have one for Dr. Coombs. One issue in the digital patient is that I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about it, is who owns the digital patient? Does the patient own the digital patient? Does the doctor own it? Does the doctor's hospital own it? Does the insurance company own it? Does the government own it? I mean, ownership defines where you have to start. And HIPAA says a patient owns their medical records, but in practice, that's not true. In practice, patients have very little access to their records. So can you give me some background? I'm sure others have thought about this, but what is your view of who would own a digital patient?
Well, again, first of all, we're really talking about, at least I am focused on the platform. And so if it's an open source platform that people, if they subscribe to certain conventions and want to import data, they can. Nobody's forcing them to. So the question, I think, really is who owns the data? And as you just said, in theory, the patient owns their data, but they don't own the data. For example, Norfolk has 15 databases about different aspects of the city that are neighborhood. And if they want to participate in this project by say, we want to build a profile for a certain neighborhood with certain demographic and income characteristics who are diabetic, then the diabetes information may come from state vital records, in which case it's public, or it may come from an aggregation of patients who opt in to share their data. But the ownership, at least, I don't want to sound grandiose at all because I'm not, it may not work out. But to me, the best analog of what I'm talking about is those folks who designed the World Wide Web in the early 90s. There weren't cell phones, there weren't email, there weren't apps, there weren't all of that stuff, but they built a platform that was robust enough you can hang all that stuff on it. And that's what I'd like to focus on because it's not there now. What we have now are an ongoing series of one-off studies about models. And the only way we're really going to move ahead to the whole thing is to say, we're going to think about the whole thing. I hope I didn't dance totally around your question.
No, that's an excellent answer. So one approach would be a web app that you can use your phone to get into and knows how to do things like I tell it who my doctor is and it knows how to contact my doctor and the doctor may refuse and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that makes more sense than some software tool in a doctor's office because recent history has shown that digital medical records are terrible. Yeah. And every 5 years, doctor offices have to go out and buy a new one because the company that was making the old set goes out of business. So we need something more flexible. That's an excellent answer. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. I want to comment on this. This is important because this entire topic was actually raised in the integration subgroup and the reproducibility subgroup. There's a problem of licenses, and we just submitted a white paper for review there. The problem is not as simple as you can think, and people have different approaches towards approaching it. The problem is also with the data licenses. The problem is also with the software licenses. And when you start integrating things, you find out that even the things that seem obvious are far from obvious. I won't go into details here. So the question that Jim asked was very, very relevant. And your answer was actually something that I can allow me to express it in different words. You said, no, I'm not looking at the system, I'm looking at the spec, because the World Wide Web is actually a specification. You're looking at the standard. And if you're looking at the standard, I see Catherine Morse here. She will be talking next week. So you might as well make sure that you hear what she has to say, because even in the world of standards, there's an issue, elements of licenses and issues related to this.
Exactly.
But I want to start to move to a different topic, and actually the question for you is both to Deborah and to you. you both, and this is a repeating question, I am asking it every week, and I want to see your answers. You both use the term predictive. Do you really think you can predict? And how predictive are you? If you are already predictive, let us know. We want to know the first one who is really predictive. But if not, what do you really call predictive? Because there are other terms to use to figure out what will happen in the future, maybe forecast, maybe project. Predictive is wrong. We're telling wrong things to the people. Can we correct this? So this is my question to you both.
Deborah, you want to go first? You want me to?
Go ahead.
Well, I guess one part of my answer would be, if you remember the image I put up of data sources for the digital patient, that does not now exist. And if you don't have all of those different types of data, you can't truly be very predictive. You can be predictive about some big things. I mean, we know that. I mean, we know that if you are a heavy smoker, you have a statistically higher risk of a variety of things. And we've got data to show that. But can we predict at an individual level? No, because we don't have all of those circles of data. So that's my answer.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you're talking about other kinds of terms like, you know, projecting and forecasting, because that's very commonly used to fudge it, right? To say, I don't really know, but I'm going to somehow get in the right quadrant, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do. And our aim is to be predictive, but we also work with natural systems that are not amenable to prediction. So, you know, we try to do the best we can. So yeah, I appreciate your question, but it is really challenging, but that needs to be our aim, is to do the best we can. And if we have to put, you know, uncertainty bars on it and probabilities on it, and if that's what you're asking, we can do that, certainly.
I want to say something. Jacob, you have to wait. Jacob, you get a lot of floor time. Let the other people speak a little bit. But I want to ask something to follow up on this then, which is, to me, both of you give a vision of integrated approaches to, we could say, forecasting rather than prediction. Although I actually am more interested in prediction because I do want to predict specific individual patient outcomes.
Right.
But to me, the platform concept is very powerful, because once you have predictions like the ones that Deborah has, you can ask the question, how well did we do? And once you know how well you did or how poorly you did, you can ask the question, what is the missing mechanistic information or the missing data sets, if it's a data-driven model, that we could do to improve the quality of our prediction? You're able to bootstrap very quickly once you have something that does some forward prediction. It doesn't have to predict very far in time. It doesn't have to be perfect. But once you have something that you can shoot at, you have the ability to bootstrap. Weather forecasting is a good example of this. And so I think it's very interesting to think about what this technology allows you to do once you deploy it. The first versions of it don't have to be perfect to be useful. And I'm happy to, we could talk at some other time about whether we should say prediction or forecast. I'd like to give the opportunity to some of our other audience to ask some questions of our speakers. Jacob, you can come back in a bit. I see some people on the call. William said, I guess you can't talk. Is there anybody else? I see Jeffrey Morgan, Adam Knapp, Lorenzo. Do you have any comments or questions? Veronica, please, anybody? Anna.
Well, tonight is a little bit far of from my expertise, I must say. The only thing I can think about as a general question is what Deborah has shown, if it can be scaled down to a cellular level, whereby the neighboring region which interacts according to certain parameters are really cells, where is more my environment. I'm focused on single cell and neighborhood of cells. So it's a little bit generic, I understand that.
Yeah, so you're asking if the approach could be used at a very small spatial scale and very fast time scale. Yes, now I think the general concept, I mean, all we're really doing is we have local processes, and then we have processes that allow things to move in space and time, right? And so that, and focusing on the processes is really important instead of just these correlation analyses. So I think in general, that sort of, conceptual model of that there are local processes, and when I could think of as spatial processes, I think that is highly scalable in both smaller and larger.
I think something that's important is that while this object process ontology for describing models is something that seems very natural once you do it, it's not something that mathematical biologists have in their bones. And so one of the things that to me was very valuable, and I think that the analogy that Lorenzo drew between building a digital patient and building a model of the Southwestern United States actually have a lot of similarities. How you organize the subcomponents of the model, how you integrate divergent data sources, how you do whatever we call prediction or forecasting, and what we do with those results and divergences. Those I suspect are going to be the same whether we're trying to build a model of the organ systems within an individual or of interactions on a large scale spatial level. And so to me, actually the combination today was very powerful because it showed the parallelism between trying to build a model of an individual digital patient and trying to build a model of the whole Southwest ecosystem of the United States. And so I maybe I'm hammering on that too much, but to me, the correlations and the similarities were more striking than the differences. Was there anybody else who had questions for the moment? I have another follow-up question, but I want to let other people speak first.
I've also got a follow-up if time permits.
Please, John.
This is for Deborah again. So back in 2004, you had this nice PNAS paper on cross-scale interactions and their potential roles in catastrophic events and maybe counterintuitive ways that they impact catastrophe. I wonder since then, and given the experience you've had with some of these actual problems, to what extent this opinion is reinforced and to what extent you might be revising it and putting weight elsewhere. I'm just curious how your thinking has maybe changed since that time.
Yeah, so the value of bringing together, so that paper talked about desertification and fires, the Columbia space shuttle blowing up, the bridge collapse, right? And so I think that I think the power of that paper is comparing all of those very different systems and how those dynamics actually play out very similarly. So they start small, then they spread to the next scale, and then they spread there, and then they spread to the next scale, and it's very nonlinear, right? You can very much make a mistake by having a linear model, either above or below, right? And I think that so it also plays out for hurricanes, right? I mean, they start off the coast of Africa, come across. I mean, there are lots of actually processes that do that, and we can explain dynamics in that way. I guess what I also learned is that not everything does that. There are some things that are linear in between those, right? So I think that it actually has framed a lot of what I do. The Dust Bowl is another good example of a cross-scale interaction, very small scale. Every farmer was doing his own thing, his or her, it was all his at that time. They're all doing their own thing. But then the combination of those, a highly connected landscape that then led to the Dust Bowl. And then you can actually stop it, right? You can actually go in, if we had gone in, actually, well, the river did it, but we could have gone in at a particular point in time and said, we can't have this much connectivity in a landscape or it's gonna, take off. So I think it's very much sort of, it was a very early sort of thinking about cross-scale interactions, but it has led to much of what I've done since that time.
Great, thank you.
Other comments, questions?
So
I guess, go ahead, Ruchira, please.
Yes, thank you. For Don Coombs, so this is perhaps due to the limitation of the format. So in the slide that introduced you, referred to several other projects, and you also referred to projects in your overview of the history, such as BioGears and Muse and HumeMod and so forth. And at the same time, you're saying that you're starting a new effort. So perhaps due to the limitation of having both to give an overview of what is the effort and then also so there wasn't as much explanation of what distinguishes a new approach from all the approaches that are going on. Like it looks like HumeMod, for instance, is a current concern.
Well, so make sure you can hear me. Our focus is twofold. The first focus is to revisit the notion and flesh out of a platform, because nobody that would be able to be used by a variety of individual workers, researchers, so that HumeMod might provide, they don't do, you couldn't use their physiological model to predict vaccine effectiveness, because we talked with them about whether they could do that. And they say, no, we don't do that. That's not what we're modeling. And so our notion isn't to compete with those who are already building models, whether those are viral models or community models, but rather to focus on how do we build a platform that allows us to reach this ultimate goal of why everybody's doing all the pieces. And so we're going to focus on that. We're not going to try to compete with Google or Microsoft or Amazon or anybody who's developing apps to do particular things, but rather to raise some of the issues that Dr. Glaser raised about what are the standards that people can agree to. It's going to have to be voluntary. We're not going to mandate this, but that's a long-winded answer to say we're trying to focus on the platform, on the middle, that enables all these pieces to come together if they only do certain things, define things the same way, have the data fields aligned, that sort of thing. So that's going to be our focus.
Focus on interoperability, you would say?
Yeah, I would say that. And then the other piece is to test that by developing a couple of models ourselves, again, where we have expertise, to see if the platform in fact allows us to pull all this data from different places and do better than what's out there now. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
I guess I'd like to maybe follow up on that a little bit, maybe more to Deborah to begin with, which is one problem you face certainly inside the body is that the boundaries of biological objects are fuzzy. There's a lot of boundary crossing, and the information that you have crossing boundaries is not always very clear. Physiology models make a particular kind of reduction of biology that may or may not be the most relevant for particular kinds of applications. And there's a lot of science we don't know about the proper way to define boundaries and information flow. And so how, in your modeling, you integrate a very large number of data sets. How did you decide essentially what the parameters were that you were going to be calculating and passing between your blocks, for example, in your models?
Yeah, so it's not actually it's not a simulation model. So what we were doing was it's maximum entropy. So it's actually a large scale multiple regression, basically. So we're not really passing information. We can get thresholds, right? And threshold sort of responses, like, the insects can't go beyond a certain temperature or precipitation. But what we were trying to do is we were actually starting from like nothing was known to generate hypotheses about what could be known, right? Could be happening. So I think that was actually a hypothesis generation exercise. But we were forming these relationships between sort of insect population dynamics and environmental variables that we could then use in that sort of correlation analysis.
Did you ever think about actually using all that structure that you built to build a dynamic mechanistic model? Looks to be like, even though you started out by doing correlation analysis at a data-centric model, you've in fact defined a lot of processes that could then be modeled dynamically as in an agent-based context, for example.
Absolutely, that would be fantastic. And so I've created numeric models for grass shrub interactions and desertification. And so it would be great to do that. I just haven't had the right person come in that could actually do that agent-based modeling for me. You're right, it'd be absolutely fantastic. That's the next step, yeah.
Because it's really there that, to me, that the connection between the virtual patient concept inside the body and the federation of information and scales and your work would connect. Okay. Other comments? John, did you have something?
I have a question for Deborah, and are you at APHIS actually?
No.
But you work with them?
Yes.
Okay, and so maybe you can answer this, maybe not. But with regard to the COV2 organism, APHIS got involved in doing testing, and if I remember right, they've reported that they found the virus in 60 animals, non-human. What do they do with that? When, if I want to say, were there autopsies? Did they sacrifice those animals in order to do research to see, what is it about those animals that allowed them to actually become symptomatic? Did they become symptomatic? I can't find any information coming out of Department of Agriculture. And as a working group for virus pandemic, the scope of where we need to be able to go to learn about how this use case COV2 affects organisms, comparative immunology questions, like if it was horses but not cows, why?
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're not a research agency, right? So I work for the Agricultural Research Service. So we're the research agency within within USDA. So
Okay.
APHIS with us, they have the occurrence data, right? So the veterinarian calls them and says, look, we have a horse, it has lesions, it needs to be checked. APHIS has some labs, and they will then just document, is it VSV? Is it, something else? We don't know. And they just provide that information. So, and for us, it's all at the county level, which is useful. If you know about the West, our counties are huge. So we then work with an APHIS collaborator to get the actual locations. So that's the other thing. You sort of have to have sort of a connection to get the additional information that they can't post publicly.
I mean, I know people at APHIS that I've asked, and they didn't seem to know yet or something. Okay, never mind.
You got to find the right person, right? Yeah.
Yes. But the point here is we need to include that kind of data
Absolutely.
about pathogens.
Well, we would be nowhere without that APHIS collaborator with VSV, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. John,
That's what our outreach group is for.
Jim, you had a question?
Send me an email and I'll ask my APHIS person if she can get you a name. Because I think it really is finding the person who sort of led that, but they're just sort of documenting, right? They aren't researchers for the most part.
Okay. Time for one last question or comment.
I have a quick question.
Please, Reed, please go ahead.
Yes, I can turn my camera on, I suppose. So it's a real question for Dr. Peters. Sorry if I missed it because it's Thursday afternoon and I'm forgetting now, but the molecular virology aspect of this, like being able to track VSV by SNPs, I know there's some lineage work done. What's the current status of that? And is it sufficient to use to validate your forecasting of when things will come? Can you track specific lineages over time? Is that improved or is that a gap? Or is that not? Or is
yeah, right. That's what Luis's lab is doing.
Yeah.
I think that I'm going to be very limited in what I can tell you, but I think that we they can at least track the lineages that it came from a certain lineage in Mexico, and then in different parts of the country in the US are different lineages. So I think that, but that's his role. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I wish we had more time, but I think we're out of time. We really appreciate our speakers being willing to stay on. I hope that the discussion was productive. I can see there's going to be a lot of opportunity to ask more questions, and I hope that this leads to integration of projects and ideas. I guess, Deborah, I was going to close with one question, which is, if you think about, if you had the equivalent of a digital patient for all of your horses and all of your insects, would that be, at the moment, because you have a data model, that might not be so useful. If you were going to go to the sort of mechanistic dynamic model, how would you use it if you had it?
So that would reduce our error on our estimates, right? Because right now we have quite a bit of error when we do sort of our regressions, and I think that having that additional knowledge would reduce that error.
That's a cool question. What if you had it for even just one? What's the simplest organism we could imagine that we could actually set out to build a digital version? That's cool.
Okay, well, thank you again, Deborah. Thank you, Don. We really appreciate it. I hope we'll be hearing from both of you again. And I hope that your presentations will lead to lots of emails and lots of offline discussion. Thank you again. Appreciate
Thank you
everyone
for the
sticking
invitation.
around.